The execution of General Elijah Patrick was not merely a sentence. It was a spectacle, a declaration to humanity that the Galactic Council held ultimate authority. Elijah Patrick, bound in thick, energy-restrictive shackles, stood on the elevated execution platform at the center of the chamber. The vast courtroom was filled with representatives of 12 dominant alien species, their various forms seated in an amphitheater-like structure surrounding him. Towering insectoids with chitinous exoskeletons, reptilian warlords with molten eyes, amorphous beings that pulsed with shifting hues, all of them had gathered to watch a human die. The Surazen High Judge, a towering creature with mandibles clicking in anticipation, regarded Patrick with something bordering amusement. Its multiple eyes reflected the light of the execution chamber, unblinking as it read aloud the formal charges. Elijah Patrick of the United Terran Federation, you stand accused of war crimes against the Galactic Council, the unprovoked destruction of Surazen colonies, and the slaughter of non-combatants. You have been found guilty. Your execution shall be carried out immediately, as dictated by the Articles of Galactic Law. Patrick's face was bruised, a deep gash cutting across his temple. His uniform, once a symbol of the finest military mind humanity had produced, was torn and bloodstained. Despite his weakened state, he stood tall, defiant even in the face of death. "You can dress this up in all the legalese you want," Patrick said, voice hoarse but unwavering. "But we both know this isn't justice. This is revenge." A murmur rippled through the council members. The Surazen judge's mandibles clicked, a wet, grinding sound. "Revenge," it repeated mockingly. "You misunderstand, human. This is balance. Humanity has upset the natural order. You overreach, take what is not yours, spread like a plague. This is a lesson to your kind." Patrick smiled, a slow, deliberate gesture. "Then you should have killed me in the dark where no one could see, because now you've given humanity a martyr. And you have no idea what you've just done." The executioner, a towering Shiran cyborg, stepped forward and adjusted the reinforced noose, an archaic method, yet deliberately chosen for its symbolic humiliation. The room was deathly silent as the mechanical winch engaged, pulling Patrick off his feet. He did not struggle. His expression did not change. Even as his body jerked against the restraint, his eyes burned with an unspoken promise. And then he was still. The silence lingered, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of the Surazen judge's mandibles. The alien delegates watched with expressions ranging from indifference to satisfaction, as if they had just stamped out a minor inconvenience. But they had not stamped anything out. They had lit a fuse. The news of Patrick's execution spread across the Terran systems like wildfire. Broadcasts captured every moment. The accusations, the hanging, the smug satisfaction on the alien council's faces. Across Earth and its colonies, a singular reaction emerged: fury. At the heart of the United Terran Federation's military command, deep within the orbital fortress of Hyperion Prime, a war council convened. Admiral Victor Hawthorne, a man whose presence commanded immediate attention, stood at the head of the round table. His iron-gray hair and chiseled features bore the weight of decades of war, but nothing had aged him like this moment. Across from him sat Colonel Samuel Wolfe, a hardened special operations leader whose tactical mind had turned the tide of countless battles. To his left, Captain Lucas Shaw, a fighter squadron leader, barely restrained his outrage. And beside them, Dr. Orion Frank, a quiet but calculating presence, tapped at the holoscreen before him, sifting through classified data streams. Hawthorne's voice cut through the tense silence. This was not an execution. This was a declaration of war. That was their intent, Wolfe said, his deep voice laced with restrained anger. They want to break our will, make us hesitate before we strike back. Shaw scoffed, shaking his head. Hesitate? They just hanged one of our best commanders like he was some common criminal. If anything, they've given us the perfect excuse to wipe them out. Frank glanced up, his analytical gaze sharp. We don't have the luxury of emotional reactions. They're expecting retaliation. What we do next has to be precise, overwhelming, and irreversible. Hawthorne tapped a sequence into the hollow table, and a map of the known galaxy materialized above them. He zoomed in on the heart of the Galactic Council's dominion, highlighting critical supply routes, outposts, and their central command structure. "We cannot fight this war conventionally," Hawthorne said. "Their numbers are greater, their technology more diverse. But humanity has one advantage they've always underestimated: our ability to adapt, to strike where they least expect it. This won't be a war of attrition. It will be a campaign of absolute dominance." Wolf leaned forward, his gaze dark. "What's the first target?" "The Surazen," Hawthorne said without hesitation. "They orchestrated this. Their colonies will burn." A grim silence settled over the room. They all knew what this meant. This was not diplomacy. This was not defense. This was the moment humanity crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Shaw exhaled sharply, nodding. "Then let's make sure it starts with hellfire." Hawthorne turned to Frank. "I want projections. Tactical simulations. Every possible scenario where we hit them hardest. We need precision." Frank nodded, already working. "I'll have a strategy drafted within the hour. But I should warn you, this will change everything." Hawthorne's gaze remained fixed on the map, his mind already waging war before the first shot was fired. "Good," he said, "because we're about to change the galaxy." The Galactic Council had underestimated humanity before. They had assumed they could break them, humiliate them, subjugate them. But they had forgotten one simple, immutable truth: humans never forgave. And they never forgot. As the war drums sounded in the heart of Earth's dominion, fleets began to mobilize. Stealth cruisers vanished into the black, their trajectories charted for enemy space. Battle carriers armed their payloads, preparing for coordinated orbital strikes. And across the vast military machine of humanity, one singular command spread like an unstoppable force: total war. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council had not merely angered humanity. They had awakened it. And there would be no mercy. The stars over Surazen Prime burned red with war. A fleet of Terran warships, sleek and lethal, emerged from the blackness of space, their hulls cloaked in the cold silence of impending death. The invasion had begun, not with a warning, not with negotiations, but with fire. Humanity had been wounded, humiliated, and now the galaxy would learn what it meant to provoke a species that had never known true defeat. Admiral Victor Hawthorne stood in the command center of the Vanguard, the United Terran Federation's flagship, eyes locked on the holographic display of the battlefield. Enemy vessels scrambled in disarray, unprepared for the sudden assault. He had given them no time to react. The first volley of kinetic railgun rounds had already torn through their outer planetary defenses before they had even registered the threat. "Enemy countermeasures are deploying," came the calm voice of Orion Frank, stationed in the Hyperion Prime war room, coordinating the war front through advanced predictive models. "Surface artillery is scrambling. They'll try to shield their capital city." "They won't get the chance," Hawthorne said coldly. He turned to Lucas Shaw, who stood poised beside him, watching the carnage unfold. "Take your squadrons in. Give them nowhere to run." Shaw's lips curled into a grin. "With pleasure." The hangar bays roared to life as squadrons of Terran fighters launched into the chaos, their engines burning blue against the vacuum of space. Shaw led the charge, his sleek X-92 Raptor weaving between the first line of Surazen interceptors. His targeting systems locked onto the first enemy warship, a bloated, beetle-like carrier attempting to deploy its own fighters. "Not today," Shaw murmured, releasing a payload of plasma-tipped missiles. They struck true, rupturing the enemy's hull in a cascading explosion that sent debris spiraling through the battlefield. Below them, the surface of Surazen Prime was engulfed in flame. Samuel Wolfe and his Special Operations Battalion had landed amidst the chaos, moving with precise, merciless efficiency. The alien resistance was fierce, but undisciplined. They were used to fighting prolonged campaigns, bureaucratic wars dictated by council decrees and arbitration. They had never fought humans in a battle of extermination. Wolf advanced through the ruined cityscape, his soldiers executing surgical strikes against key enemy strongholds. He moved like a phantom in the dust, his rifle never missing its mark. An energy blast struck the wall beside him, sending shards of stone and metal into the air. He didn't flinch. "Push forward," Wolf ordered, voice calm amidst the chaos. "We take the central command hub. No survivors." His men didn't hesitate. There was no need for second-guessing. They had all seen the execution. They had all watched their own kind humiliated before the galaxy. Now there would be no quarter. The Sarazen Chancellor, a high-ranking official responsible for orchestrating Patrick's trial, had retreated to the planetary fortress at the city's center. He had sent out desperate transmissions, begging the Galactic Council for aid. None had responded. As Wolf's team breached the final defensive perimeter, the Chancellor, a grotesque amalgamation of spindly limbs and segmented plates, cowered behind a force shield. His mandibles trembled as the Terran soldiers surrounded him. "This is genocide," the alien shrieked. "You're monsters." Wolf aimed his pistol. "No. This is justice." A single shot ended the war for Sarazen Prime. The fall of the planet sent ripples across the galactic dominion. Fear took root in the heart of every alien species that had once dismissed humanity as insignificant. The brutality of the attack was not in its scale, but in its efficiency. Sarazen Prime had been a military stronghold, fortified over centuries. It had fallen in a single night. The Galactic Council, now fully aware of the storm they had unleashed, convened in desperation. Their forces were superior in numbers, their fleets spanning countless systems. But they lacked something humanity had in abundance: rage. From the war room on Hyperion Prime, Orion Frank assessed the enemy's next moves with unsettling precision. His AI-driven war simulations mapped out potential counterattacks, predictive algorithms running through thousands of scenarios. "They'll retaliate," he said, adjusting data streams in real time. "Hard. They'll hit our colonies first, trying to weaken supply lines." Hawthorne nodded, his mind already moving 10 steps ahead. "We let them, and when they overextend, we cut their throats." Even as the Galactic Council attempted to rally their fleets, humanity had already moved to its next target. Wolf's battalion deployed across another sector, executing precision strikes against supply convoys. Shaw's fighter squadrons disrupted trade routes, leaving enemy warships stranded without reinforcements. The UTF's dreadnought fleet carved a path toward the heart of the enemy's dominion, decimating every military installation in their way. With every victory, humanity's tactics became more ruthless, more refined. They fought not just for retribution, but for dominance. Then came the first real challenge. A coalition fleet, massive and unified, launched a counteroffensive at Outpost Vega 9, one of the UTF's largest forward operating bases. It was humanity's foothold in enemy space, and the aliens had deemed it necessary to wipe it from existence. The battle for Vega 9 was unlike anything the war had seen so far. The UTF fleet, outnumbered nearly 4-1, held its ground against an overwhelming onslaught. Enemy battleships unleashed relentless barrages, their energy beams cutting through human defenses. The station's shields flickered, threatening to collapse under the sheer force of the assault. Wolf's battalion, still on site, fought tooth and nail against the incoming ground assault. They had nowhere to run. Retreat was not an option. "Status," Wolf barked over comms, his rifle smoking as he cut down another advancing squad of alien warriors. "Station shields at 30%, came the urgent response from command. "We can't hold much longer." Wolf clenched his jaw. He had fought in impossible battles before, but this wasn't just about survival. If Vega 9 fell, humanity would lose its momentum. Across the void, the vanguard arrived in a blaze of white fire. Hawthorne had brought reinforcements. The arrival of UTF's dreadnoughts turned the tide. Plasma rounds and kinetic strikes tore through enemy formations. Fighters swarmed like angry hornets, cutting apart bombers before they could breach the station. The battle turned from desperation to annihilation as the coalition fleet began to break. Shaw's squadron led the final attack run, weaving between the wreckage of fallen ships. His voice crackled through the comms. "Let's clean this up, boys." Within the next hour, what remained of the enemy fleet was either burning or in full retreat. Vega 9 held. Humanity held. As the war continued, a grim realization spread across the alien coalition. They had underestimated humanity, not just their military, not just their tactics, their resolve. The message became clear with each conquered planet, each shattered fleet. The Galactic Council thought they had hanged a man. Instead, they had unleashed a species that refused to kneel. And there was no stopping what came next. The void between the stars had become a graveyard. Once proud warships, now broken husks, drifted aimlessly through the darkness. Their shattered remains a testament to humanity's relentless advance. What had begun as a campaign of vengeance had evolved into something far greater, a systematic dismantling of the Galactic Council's dominion. The war had taken on a momentum of its own, and for the first time in recorded history, the rulers of the galaxy understood fear. Admiral Victor Hawthorne stood at the command deck of the Vanguard, his expression unreadable as he studied the latest reports. Humanity's forces had secured half a dozen enemy strongholds, decimating entire fleets in a matter of weeks. What should have been a protracted war had turned into an onslaught, one that the Council had no means of stopping. But victories, no matter how swift, always came at a cost. "Report," Hawthorne said without turning. Dr. Orion Frank, ever methodical, sifted through the data before speaking. "We've spread their forces thin. Multiple systems are in chaos. However, they've finally consolidated their remaining fleet. Estimated numbers suggest a force twice the size of anything we've encountered thus far. And they're heading straight for our supply lines." Hawthorne exhaled, placing a hand against the holomap. He had expected this. The aliens had been reactive, scrambling to contain humanity's advance. But this was different. This was their first coordinated strike. The Council had learned, adapted. Lucas Shaw leaned against the edge of the war table, his expression tense. "So they're finally playing smart. About damn time. Where are they hitting us?" "The Antares corridor," Frank answered. Outpost Vega 9 was the first sign of their new strategy. But this time, they're not launching desperate offensives. They're forcing us into a war of attrition, cutting off our reinforcements, isolating our fleets. Samuel Wolfe, arms crossed, studied the data in silence. He had seen enough battles to recognize the implications. "They want to slow us down," he said at last. "Make us bleed, force us into defensive positions. If we give them time to regroup, this turns into a prolonged war. And that's not a war we can afford." Hawthorne nodded, his mind already calculating. "Then we don't give them time?" For all the power humanity had accumulated for all their victories, the reality was unavoidable. They were still outnumbered. If the Council managed to regain its footing, if they could pull together their remaining factions and industrial power, the war could shift. Humanity had shocked the galaxy. But if they hesitated, if they faltered even for a moment, the Council's sheer numerical superiority would grind them down. This had to end before it reached that point. "We take the initiative," Hawthorne said at last. "We draw them into open battle." Wolfe narrowed his eyes. "And where, exactly, do you plan to make our last stand?" "Not a stand," Hawthorne corrected. "A trap." The room fell silent. The plan was risky, borderline reckless, but it was the only path forward. Hawthorne's forces would bait the Council into a full-scale engagement at the Karak Belt, a region of space filled with dense asteroid clusters and unstable gravitational fields. On paper, it was the worst possible battlefield. The Council would believe they had pinned humanity down, forcing them into unfavorable terrain. But Hawthorne knew better. He would turn the environment against them. He would let them bring everything they had, let them believe victory was within reach, and then he would break them. The trap was set. The combined might of the Galactic Council's armada arrived in full force. The vast expanse of space was blotted out by warships, their numbers stretching beyond what most human tacticians would deem survivable. The sheer mass of firepower aimed at the Terran fleet was enough to incinerate planets. But Hawthorne had no intention of fighting a fair battle. As soon as the enemy fleet reached the heart of the Karak Belt, the first phase of the plan commenced. Remote-activated gravity mines, hidden within the asteroids, detonated in synchronized bursts. The already unstable field erupted into chaos, sending massive debris colliding into the enemy ranks. Entire battleships were crushed by the unpredictable gravitational shifts, their hulls collapsing like fragile glass. In the confusion, Shaw's fighter squadrons struck from the shadows, weaving between the wreckage like phantoms. Their weapons cut through enemy command vessels, severing fleet coordination before it could fully take hold. The battlefield became a storm of debris and fire, ships colliding in the chaos. Then, Wolf's Special Operations Team struck. Using the cover of the wreckage, they infiltrated the enemy's flagship, a Leviathan-class dreadnought leading the Council's fleet. The plan was simple but brutal. Take out the command structure from within. The corridors of the enemy warship were a maze of glowing circuitry and alien architecture, but Wolf and his men moved with lethal precision. They eliminated guards in silence, planting charges along key structural points. When they reached the command chamber, they found themselves face to face with the Council's supreme commander, an ancient reptilian warlord whose species had ruled the stars for centuries. The alien glared at them, eyes burning with hatred. "You think this will end humanity's suffering?" the warlord hissed. "Even if you kill me, the war will not stop. We will never bow." Wolf's gun didn't waver. "Neither will we." A single shot rang out. Explosions rocked the enemy flagship as Wolf's team exfiltrated, barely making it to their own escape vessels as the dreadnought broke apart from within. The destruction rippled through the battlefield. Without centralized leadership, the enemy fleet began to fragment. It was complete devastation. Hawthorne watched from the Vanguard's command deck as the enemy fleet collapsed. Some vessels attempted to retreat, but humanity had no intention of letting them escape. The UTF fleet hunted them down, cutting off warp routes, ensuring no survivors. The war should have ended that day. And yet, Hawthorne couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As reports came in from the outer systems, it became clear the Galactic Council had been stalling. They had played their final card too early, sacrificing their primary fleet to buy time. But for what? Then the transmission came. It was broadcasted on every human channel, across every colony, every warship. An alien voice, guttural and cold, echoed through the communication lines. "You believe you have won, but you have only forced our hand." The screen flickered, revealing an image that sent ice through Hawthorne's veins. Earth, under siege. Massive enemy dreadnoughts had slipped past the front lines, bypassing the war altogether. The Galactic Council had known they could not win in open combat, so they had struck at the very heart of humanity. Cities burned. Defensive stations were overwhelmed. Humanity's homeworld was on the brink of annihilation. Hawthorne clenched his fists, the weight of it all crashing down at once. They had been so focused on breaking the enemy, they had failed to protect their own. The war was no longer about conquest. It was now a fight for survival, and humanity had only one chance left to turn the tide. The Galactic Council had played its final hand, striking humanity where it was weakest, its home, its cradle, its last refuge. The Terran fleets had been drawn into war across the stars, stretched thin by relentless campaigns of vengeance, and the enemy had seized their moment. Thousands of alien warships now encircled Earth, their bombardments reducing entire cities to ash. What had once been a planet teeming with industry, culture, and history was now a battlefield. Admiral Victor Hawthorne stood at the bridge of the Vanguard, his gaze fixed on the live feed of the destruction. Smoke and fire smothered Earth's surface, its orbital defenses shattered, its people running for their lives beneath the monstrous silhouettes of enemy dreadnoughts. The cries for help came in waves over the comms, voices of civilians, soldiers, leaders, each one pleading for salvation. There was no time for grief. How many enemy ships? His voice was steel. Dr. Orion Frank, face illuminated by shifting holographic data, responded without looking up. More than 6,000 vessels, heavily armed. They've established a blockade. If we engage head-on, we'll be wiped out before breaking the first line. Lucas Shaw, standing at the helm, clenched his fists. Then we don't go in head-on. Samuel Wolfe entered the command deck, still armored from his last operation, his face set in grim determination. We have one shot at this. If Earth falls, the war ends. And not in our favor. Hawthorne didn't need to be told. He had fought 100 battles, had witnessed humanity rise from an outnumbered species to an unstoppable force. But this was different. This wasn't just another war front. This was everything. He pressed a control on the hollow table, and a schematic of the Omni warhead appeared. The weapon was unlike anything used before, a fusion of human ingenuity and salvaged alien technology, a planetary disruptor capable of wiping entire fleets in a single detonation. It had been a contingency plan, an unthinkable measure, one that had never needed to be used. Until now. Frank spoke first, his voice measured but heavy. The Omni warhead will end this battle before it begins. If we deploy it at the center of their fleet, it will create a cascading energy reaction, disabling their entire armada. Wolfe's eyes darkened. And Earth. Unscathed, Frank confirmed. The energy dispersion will be contained. But the enemy fleet will be erased. Silence settled over the command deck. Shaw exhaled, shaking his head. That's not a weapon. That's a goddamn extinction event. Hawthorne knew what he was asking them to do. They had fought tooth and nail to prove humanity was not the mindless scourge the galaxy believed them to be. And yet, here they stood, ready to wield a weapon that would cement that very fear. Wolfe stepped forward. If we don't do this, Earth dies. The Council will never let us rise again. We have one chance. Shaw met Hawthorne's eyes. What's the call, Admiral? There was no hesitation. Hawthorne pressed a command, and the war room's red alert activated. Deploy the warhead. The fleet roared to life. Human warships surged forward, engines blazing as they cut through the blackness of space toward their dying world. The Vanguard led the charge, carrying the Omni warhead deep into the heart of the enemy's blockade. As the fleet neared Earth's atmosphere, the reality of the battle struck them like a physical blow. Skyscrapers crumbled into dust, firestorms ravaged continents, and the Council's forces swarmed like locusts. Dreadnoughts loomed above the planet like executioners, their cannons raining down destruction. Shaw's squadron accelerated, pushing into enemy formations at breakneck speed. We need to clear a path for the warhead deployment. Keep their eyes on us. He dove into the storm, weaving between enemy fighters, plasma rounds streaking past his hull. One by one, his squadron picked apart key ships, cutting through the chaos with unmatched precision. On the surface, scattered human forces fought desperately against the invasion. The resistance was fractured, its defenses overwhelmed, but it refused to break. Civilians ran through the ruins, searching for shelter. Children clung to their parents, soldiers carried wounded comrades, and still they fought. They had to. From orbit, Wolfe and his battalion launched their final drop assault. As their drop pods tore through the sky, he checked his weapon, steeling himself for what lay below. They landed in the heart of the enemy's occupation, storming into battle with the ferocity only humanity could muster. They didn't fight for conquest or for glory. They fought because there was no other option. Above, the vanguard reached its destination. "The warhead is primed," Frank reported. "We have 1 minute." The enemy forces realized too late what was happening. Their comms exploded with frantic orders, their ships breaking formation in a desperate attempt to retreat. Hawthorne watched them flee, his voice like iron. Fire! The Omni-warhead launched. The silence before the detonation was absolute. Then, a blinding pulse of energy erupted from the warhead's core, spreading outward in a tidal wave of destruction. The energy rippled through the fleet, consuming warships, obliterating dreadnoughts, leaving nothing but fire and echoes. The shockwave rippled across the stars, leaving no trace of the once mighty Council armada. Earth was saved. But the war was not over. The Galactic Council, now crippled, faced its reckoning. Humanity had proven that it was no longer a species to be controlled, no longer a minor power to be dismissed. Hawthorne stood before the burning wreckage of what had once been the Council's seat of power. The remaining leaders, those who had not fled, knelt before him, defeated. "You thought we would kneel," he said, voice cold. "You thought we would break. You killed our own in arrogance, believing it would make us fear you." He stepped forward, leveling his gaze at the surviving Council officials. But humanity has never feared the dark. With the war won, a new order rose. Earth had endured its trial by fire, and what emerged from the ashes was no longer the United Terran Federation. It was something greater, a new dominion, a new age, and at its helm, humanity reigned.